Hi, this is Wesley,
This is Kashina.
and you're listening to
In Between the Lines. Whew. I'm glad that snow business is over.
Thank God that snow business is over.
It's been a while.
You can finally come back.
I've been doing it the other way was alright, but I prefer being in person.
Yeah, me too.
That was a little bit hard. But yeah, I'm finally back, Wesley. Aren't you glad to have me back?
Yes, I am.
Not just as some corporeal spirit.
But hey, for the snow out of the way. Hey, do you want to know something?
Sure, Wesley. What?
Do you remember me?
Who are you?
I have no clue.
Oh my god. So, just to let you guys know, we're going to be talking about a movie called
Your Name.
Or as it's known in Japanese, Kimi no Nawa. I know, I'm an idiot. Please ignore me.
No, you good. You good. We all nerds on this show.
I mean, this show is literally just us being nerds.
So, I'm going to say this now. This movie came out back in 2016. So,
But if you guys look at it from the visuals alone, you wouldn't have been able to tell that because it's just amazing. We're gonna talk about the animation, the visuals, and everything here in a little bit.
So you have been warned.
Oh yeah, spoiler warning. We're literally talking nothing. We're just gonna be talking about this movie and everything that happens in it. So
this movie is an hour and 46 minutes.
Yeah, it's not a very, very long movie. So just to let you guys know, if you guys are wondering if you guys should watch this is a recommendation from both of us.
Yeah.
He's watched it 3, probably 4 or 5 times already.
Yeah. Even before us coming into the studio and doing this now. Your boy had to watch it twice over.
And then me, I watched it for the first time a couple of days ago, and I just gotta say, oh my god, why didn't I watch this when it first came out? But yeah, so with that out of the way, yes, watch it. And now we're going to go into the meat and potatoes of this movie. So, first off, the story.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's going to be a doozy.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens within this. You got time travel, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got people switching bodies. It's mainly just our two main leads. But yeah.
So it's gonna be confusing. I'm gonna give you guys the synopsis of this movie.
You do the synopsis this time. You've had me do the synopsis all the time.
I know. The synopsis of this movie is okay. So this movie is about 2 characters. Mm-hmm. One's named Taki Tabana. Yeah.
Tachibana.
Taki Tachibana. Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna say the last name of the other girl because oh my god. So one is about a high schooler boy who lives in Tokyo, who lives a somewhat busy life. He works as a server, and he goes to school, and he's also obviously in Tokyo. It's freaking busy all the time. I've personally been there, and I have to say it's horrifying how many people can surround you in just 2 seconds. But he lives there. It's very bustling. He lives somewhat of a busy life, and he just wants to become an architect. You know, he wants to live somewhat of a simple life. Yeah. Then the other lead is a girl named, I almost forgot her name for a second, Mitsuha. Oh no, it's the movie. I turned to Taki. But her name is Mitsuha, and she's this girl who lives in a rural town called Itomori. Itomori, which the visuals alone, it's a very beautiful, gorgeous looking place. I do believe it's made up though.
I think so, yeah.
It might be. Yeah. We're going to assume that it's made up, but if it is an actual place, please forgive us. I'll do better. I'll have to do better research into it.
Or even if you know, at least let us know in the comments, please.
Yeah, please. So she lives in a rural town called Itomori, and she's a shrine maiden. She's kind of bored of the boring life, as she likes to categorize it. It's funny because at the beginning of the movie, her and her friend. Oh, speaking of which, the way me and Wesley watched this movie, he watched it in dub.
She watched it in sub.
So if there are some things that seem different as to what we're saying, he'll be talking about things through the dub point of view. So they might have said things differently. But they said some of these things. I hope they said some of these things in the dub, because things in the sub, they were complaining about how the town didn't really have a lot. They didn't even have a bookstore. Yeah. It had 2 bars right next to each other for no apparent reason.
They didn't have a cafe.
Well, they said, the dude said, hey, do you want to go to a cafe? And they're like, ooh, a cafe? Where? And then they go to a vending machine.
It cuts to them being at a vending machine, and the girl, not Mitsuha, but her friend is like, why do you think this is a cafe? He's like, like this town actually has a cafe.
Yeah, in the Japanese, and like in the sub, he says, we don't have a cafe. She was like, this is what you mean by a cafe? He was like, we don't have one. I love that part. But so she complains about how everything is just very rural. Her home life is somewhat difficult. She lives with her grandma because her mother's passed. And
her father has now become a politician.
And
has left the shrine.
Yeah, he used to be a priest, but now he's just left all of that to become a politician, and there's some stuff behind him with that one.
Strict politician.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
The relationship between her and her father is a little bit stressed. But so, she's just tired of the very boring life. And the one thing that she specifically says is she wishes to be a hot Japanese boy.
Yeah, in her next life.
Well, a hot boy living in Tokyo in her next life. That's specifically what she said. And then we start cutting to... So that was everything that, made sense.
For the most part.
Everything that happens afterwards gets so confusing. Especially even what happens at the beginning of the movie, because you're like, so what's happening? It's just... It's hard to explain. Literally, it's one of those movies where you're like, if you try to explain it, there's some circle logic that goes on, and you're just confused, all the time. Confused and trying to explain it, it's one of those you just have to sit down, watch, and relax, and just let things happen.
Yeah.
So, here's the reason why I'm having a hard time explaining to you what's happening. Wesley has mentioned before, there's body switching.
Swap. But the thing is that when
literally,
God help us.
Literally, this whole episode is just gonna be like, oh my God, how can we? It's a good movie. It's not a bad movie.
Yeah,
it's confusing. It's not okay. It's confusing, but it's beautiful.
So here's the thing: when it came to the body switching, it only happens when our leads, I should say.
Yeah.
I'm putting them in. You guys can see this. Why am I explaining this?
Yeah.
But when our leads are asleep, that's when they actually switch bodies. And so, by that, I have to explain for those who don't know. Mitsuha, our female lead, goes into Taki's body.
Yeah.
Taki, our male lead, goes into Mitsuha's body.
Yeah.
So basically, they think they're dreaming and they're living each other's lives. And the funny thing is that when they go back to their actual bodies, you hear everything from everyone else, and they're like, "Hey, you were acting kind of weird yesterday."
Yeah, that's the hilarious part. So,
what were you doing?
Think about it like this. The best equivalent I can bring to this is think of Freaky Friday, but happening multiple times throughout a week.
Yeah.
And it lasts for a whole day, except in Freaky Friday, I think it lasts for 2 or 3 days. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And it's not between a mom and a daughter. It's literally between two people who has never, scratch that. They've met once.
Yeah.
But it was because there's some time travel shenanigans.
Yeah.
We'll get to that here in a second too.
But the thing is that it also doesn't just span a single day. It spans over a couple days, a couple of months actually.
Yeah, a couple of months. They said in there at first it would just be randomly. We wouldn't know when to expect it, and it would literally happen sometimes a few times a week.
Yeah.
It's what I think Taki said.
Yeah. Same thing in the I was about to say the sub.
In the dub, yeah.
And it got to a point where they actually started keeping a journal for each one, so every time they switched bodies,
they would know
give each other a report like, hey, this is what happened, while I was you for that day. And then they got mad at each other a lot. They're sitting there writing on each other. They're like, stupid idiot. Oh,
I loved it because that was the best part of the movie. Because when it slowly started to become normal for them to switch bodies, and the reason behind they switch bodies I'll explain here in a second, but when it started becoming a normal everyday occurrence where when they woke up in the other ones, they're like, okay, yeah, sure,
yeah,
cool, let's see how this goes on, guys. Alright, let's go on with today's schedule. The fact that they would leave little notes to each other, it was cute because in the boys' notes it said don't talk in a dialect, don't do embroidery. Like, what? And she would say, keep your legs closed when wearing a skirt and stuff like that.
Because even for the dub, they have the overview narration of it when they're passing the notes back and forth.
Yeah.
And for Taki, it says no dialect. And then when Taki's in Mitsuha's body. She's like, "Hey, watch the skirt. That's proper."
Yeah. It was just like, that was like the cutest little scene I saw, and it was the fact that, like, you know, they weren't too freaked out about it. Like, after they found out what was happening,
Yeah.
they were just kind of chill. They're like, okay, yeah, sure, this is happening now. We're just gonna go on with our lives for this. The fact that they weren't like, you know, should we find out why this is happening? No, that never happened. They were just kind of like,
It was kind of weird at first because, like, when Mitsuha is in Taki's body at first, like, this is coming from the dub,
yeah.
and Taki is talking with his friends, and he's sitting there taking pictures of the
The
food,
cakes,
and
yeah.
then he's like, dreams sure are weird, and I'm like,
Yeah.
dreams.
Yeah, like, cause she's like, oh, this is such a weird dream, and it turns out it's not a dream.
Yeah.
So the body switching. How does one explain this? Okay, they kind of explained it in the movie. There
We're out of
is
time.
the reason why they're switching bodies is because some god shenanigans. Basically, one, there's a theme in the movie that's kind of more explained upon in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And there's this, in Japan, they don't have like a set religion, but in traditional Japanese culture, there used to be this very strong prevalent tradition called Shinto. You can still see it being somewhat worshipped there still, because they still have the shrines to the gods and stuff like that. And so one of these concepts that's in Shinto is musubi, which is, it's a very hard concept to explain, but in the grandmother's words, she basically says this: tying the thread is musubi, connecting people is musubi, the flow of time is musubi. These are all God's powers.
Yep.
It's basically the thing that brings us all together is supposedly what musubi means. And after that explanation, you kind of understand that the reason why they're switching bodies so often is because of this musubi. The gods are not gods. Well, yeah, there's multiple gods. There's kind of like one singular god, and then there's like multiple
Kind of like
smaller
splits
gods.
off.
Yeah, but so
I guess one thing we can also talk about, like, still adding on to the whole musubi thing, is because the one thing that I got from what the grandmother was saying was that basically, like, with the thread,
yeah,
and you know, thread breaks and can unwind, but it's always reconnected.
yeah.
So
I love
that
that
basically
part,
is
yeah.
time.
That is time. So time is musubi.
Yeah.
Musubi is a really, really interesting subject that I would love to get more deep into. And so that was one of the reasons why they were switching bodies. One of the other reasons why they switch bodies is because, so remember earlier when we said she's a shrine maiden? Well, apparently all of those who take care of that shrine, it is, the grandmother experienced it too when she would have dreams and not remember exactly what was happening, but she would switch bodies with another person. It's a thing that happens to those that take care of that specific shrine.
And apparently she was like, cherish these memories because you won't have them forever.
It's so sad.
I'm just like, that's a little bit, I mean, it's good. Like, don't get me wrong. It's weird. It would be weird to, like, if you and me were to, like, sit here and swap places. But I mean, like, once you gain that experience, I'm just saying, hypothetically, if we were to gain the experience from one another's lives through the other people that they actually knew, I guess it's good because then they know something about that other person's life that nobody else would know.
Yeah, and then
I
so
hope that made sense.
this movie, you know what? That's the best way we can try to
Yeah.
make it make sense. So the other reason why we're having a hard time explaining to you logically what's all up with this movie is because of the time travel aspect.
Yeah.
So remember when we talked about Taki and Mitsuha? Mitsuha? I pronounced her name so weirdly. So you would think they were like, this was happening and it's all happening at, like, you know, the correct time. I'm going to put that in quotations because it's really hard to explain what happens next. Apparently, this is so hard to explain, man.
Mitsuha is like, what, 3 years in the
Mitsuha
past?
is 3 years in the past because this is all happening, okay, around Mitsuha's point of view, this is all happening before a comet flies by the Earth and a piece of it breaks off and comes as a meteor towards her town, essentially killing her on the day of a festival.
Yeah.
We find this out in the middle of the thing where things are happening. She sets up a date for Taki with a girl
Yeah.
that she really, really likes and stuff like that. It was so sweet. I love it. And oh boy, I'm sorry. I'm
No, you good.
doing my best to explain.
You're doing alright.
This movie, though.
This movie was insane, but like I get what you're saying because like you know
I know. I know you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I gotta get down to understand.
So basically, Mitsuha basically arranges a date for Taki, and we're gonna call her Senpai.
Yeah, because we don't know her name.
Yeah. Oh no, her name was Miss Okudera.
Okudera.
Yeah, Okudera.
I'm so gonna call her Senpai.
We can call her Senpai for now, but she originally arranged the date for her and Senpai.
Yeah.
The switch happened, and then Mitsuha was just like, I wanted to go on the date though.
Yeah.
Which I can kind of understand that from her point of view because you know she kind of formed that bond between them.
Yeah.
And it's just weird because then when the date happens, the senpai, she's like, you're a totally different person. And I'm like, that kind of, oh, that's a low blow.
But the day that date happened, at the end of that specific message,
Oh yeah, because she was like, don't you know it?
yeah, Mitsuha said, hopefully by the time the date ends, we can both see the comment.
Mhm.
And Taki was like, comment. What is she talking about? That's really weird. But from Mitsuha's point of view, this happened 3 years back, where the same comment went by, and he saw it happen.
Mhm.
But it was 3 years ago for him. It was happening for her at that present moment.
Yeah.
Oof.
Oof, indeed.
Even me looking at my notes, like I have notes right here, and even here I'm just kind of like, what is happening?
Yeah.
But so that's why it's really hard, because there's a time loop that happens where she actually Mitsuha goes to Tokyo for a little bit to meet up with Taki. But this was before.
This is before Taki
This is
ever
with-
knew.
Yeah, this is with the Taki that hasn't experienced a body switch.
Yeah.
So they meet up, and he's like, she says, hey, do you remember me? And he says, I don't know you. And in his mind, he's thinking like, this is such a weird girl.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It was just weird because then like, but when she gets to Tokyo, she's like, hey, what am I gonna say when I actually meet him? She's like, am I gonna annoy him? Is he not gonna like me? He's probably not gonna even remember me. And then she's like, no, he will remember me, because when she meets him, she's like, when we lock eyes together, she's like, you will know that you were, part of me. I will know that I was part of you. But then when we actually meet, he's like, who the heck are you?
Yeah, because this was before, for him, this was before the body switches started happening,
Yeah.
but for her, this was all happening at this moment. And it just gets weird. So yeah, at the beginning of the movie, technically she dies, but
Yeah.
Taki then goes on this very grand adventure to go try to find Mitsuha because he thinks that she's still alive. Comes to find out, the meteor 3 years ago killed her, and the Mitsuha that he has been experiencing this whole thing with is technically dead at this current time.
Because when it happened, after the whole date that we had talked about, Taki kind of messes up the date a little bit, and he's like, well, now I gotta go tell Mitsuha how bad the date went next time we do the body switch, and it doesn't work.
It gets so, like, I love this movie, don't get me wrong, it just gets so confusing.
But I will say this, the music.
Oh yeah, so we're gonna get away from the whole confusing thing.
Yeah.
And we're just going to talk about the things that we actually like. Because I like the story.
Mm-hmm.
It just gets very, very confusing at times. So instead, we're just going to talk about the music and the animation. The thing that makes the most sense.
Yeah. To us at least.
To us at least. So I'm going to let you go first. Because you are a huge music nerd. I am too. But you actually...
But you're more in the animation.
I'll like go crazy over the animation here in a second. So I'm going to allow you to talk about the music real quick. He's been like so ready to tell us about the music.
Yes, I have. The music was good. I'm trying to remember. I think it was like Rad Wimps or something.
Red Wimps.
Red Wimps.
Yeah, something like that. It was a really weird band name.
But the music was good. It fit the visuals very well. It conveyed a lot of emotion. There were some hype points when you're just like, "Yo, we going to do this!"
Oh yeah! Oh my god!
Yeah. And it also like it helped convey like the scenery, like whether you're in Tokyo or you're out, like
in the rural
areas, and you're just like, okay, you can actually feel what's going on.
I will admit there are times, especially when the singing would happen, where I actually cried.
Yeah, it did kind of have me like tear up a little bit, because like there was also a time where it's like there's like a time lapse going on, and the music in the dub, like the music is like blasting.
It was like that for the sub
like,
as well.
I was like, I had to turn down my computer, and I'm like, oh, that's a little bit too loud. But I'm just like, it kind of fits though, because it's showing it's a passage of time.
You know,
instead of just being like, hey, we're gonna have these characters talk for a little bit, and then just overlay a whole bunch of songs on top. And I'm like, that ain't the way to do it, Chief.
Yeah, like I can understand why they did it. They were basically showing that this was starting to become a very mundane part of life for them, where they were keeping each other, you know, they're giving each other tabs about what was happening, what they did that day, and you know, it was a normalcy for them. So I understand why the music did all that, and I love that part.
Now we get into the animation. We get into your side of things.
Oh my god! Ah! But how do I even start? The visuals, they are so beautiful. Literally, I loved every bit of this movie. I will
say one thing before you continue.
Yeah.
There was one animation that stood out. Like there was like one in particular scene that stood out to me, and it was the shrine that they had to go to.
Yeah.
To put the I can't actually remember the name, but it's like the alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah. That whole scene, that whole like crater and everything that's within it, I was just like, yo. But yeah, continue. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good because that's what I was about to say. Like, you could take any part of this movie, screenshot it, and make it a wallpaper.
Oh, definitely.
It is. I would love to like just fill my whole room up with scenes, like shots of this thing.
They also used real world locations too.
Yeah. Especially for like Tokyo and stuff like that. Like I saw some of the places and I was like, that looks familiar. That scene looks somewhat like, you know, one of the places that I went to. It is so freaking gorgeous, and the animation itself. There is one part in the movie where the animation becomes super good. It's like it becomes so colorful. It looks like hand-drawn animation.
Oh yeah,
it's beautiful. But there's one part where I wanted to say in particular. A lot of people give flack to CG animation.
Yeah,
and they're like, "Oh, don't put that in my anime. It doesn't really work out." Well, it was the part where she was doing a sacred dance and she was performing it in front of people. And you can tell that it was kind of done with CG animation.
Yeah.
But it's
like barely noticeable.
Yeah, like it's because of the movements. The movements are super fluid and stuff like that, but it's so seamlessly like integrated in. It works really well. Mm-hmm. I like it. I like it especially. And I was like, wow, ooh.
Yep.
I look at this movie and I'm like, oh yes. So one thing I wanted to say, and I guess I'll mention this one thing and then we'll kind of like end the video, because I also want us to talk about our favorite parts of the movie before we end. So me, I think I've mentioned this before. I mentioned it many times and I've poorly demonstrated it multiple times throughout this podcast's runtime. Is I've studied Japanese. I know very basic Japanese. And there's specifically one part of the movie that I wanted to talk about where if you don't know Japanese, it didn't translate well. Let me explain it like this.
Okay, go ahead.
It was interesting how they try to fix it, but it doesn't really translate well, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, there is one part that I will forever call the Watashi scene from Your Name. And those who have watched the movie in sub, at least, will know what I'm talking about. I had to kind of explain it before you were like, oh yeah, it's this scene.
Yeah.
So first off, in Japan, in the Japanese language, there are multiple ways to say the pronoun I, as in I, me, myself.
Yeah.
And it depends on how you yourself see yourself or how you wish to project yourself. So, quick Japanese lesson. The very common way of saying I is watashi. You know, that's very common. But it's also seen as slightly a feministic way.
Yeah.
The way males usually, especially teenaged males to grown-ups, refer to themselves is either as boku or ore. Those are seen as more masculine.
Okay.
And then there are other ways too, like watakuchiki, but it really depends on how you see yourself. In this scene...
More like you have like more masculine and feminine sayings. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very hard to explain, but like if you study Japanese, you'll kind of learn that, oh, this is just a thing that happens.
I'm using my other knowledge of other languages that I've studied. Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand.
I was about to say, yeah, I don't know if there's any other equivalents to it, but we don't have that in English. We just say I.
Yeah.
So there's a scene where it was Mitsuha's first transition over to Taki's body, and she meets his friends. And, you know, you could talk about this scene too, because I'll let you... yeah.
Okay, so when Mitsuha first is going into Taki's body and she meets his friends,
they ask her...
It's weird, because, like, for seeing it in the dub, you can clearly tell, because with Taki, his voice... Normal Taki, his voice is low. When it's Mitsuha talking, his voice is a little bit higher. So you can tell, hey, this isn't him. But when he's talking with his friends, the first thing he says, they're like, hey, why were you late? And he's like, oh, I met this girl. And they're like, And then he's like, gal. Guy?
Yeah, it was really weird because in the Japanese way, in the subtitles, it's totally misdirected. So, you know, they asked him, like, you know, why was you late? And he was like, oh, you know, a girl like me. Because in the subtitles they said a girl like me, and they're like, a girl. They're like, huh? And then so he said, fella, huh? Stud? What? Guy? Yes. But what they were actually doing in the thing was, the way Taki, Mitsuha, and Taki's body, she was speaking how she normally spoke. Yeah. So she said, watashi, and then they were like, what? They're like, that's not how you usually refer to yourself. And then she was like, watakuchiki, and they're like, that's not normal either. She was like, boku? Huh? Ore? Oh. And so they were basically like correcting her in their proper way of saying I. Yeah. How Taki usually says I, which is apparently ore, not watashi. But it's interesting how they try to fix that. There's a lot of, whenever it comes to translating anime over to English, there's a lot of different ways people would try to fix that problem. The way they've tried to fix it for this movie, interesting. Yeah. And that's what I have to say. It's a very interesting way how they try to fix it. Because that's very important and very integral, because it shows that there's a body switching thing happening right now. Yeah. But enough about me nerding out about the Japanese culture. It's almost time for us to end this video and podcast, depending on how you're viewing this, because for those who don't know, we're doing it as both a video and as audio. Yeah. So before we end,
somebody has to edit this, but
subscribe to our YouTube channel,
please. Also, thumbs up, please.
Like and subscribe. We are really becoming that YouTube channel. So before we continue on with our shilling of ourselves, Wesley, how about you talk about your favorite scene, and I'll quickly talk about my favorite scene.
Cool. So my favorite scene was, so there's this thing that's known as Magic Hour, or as I call it, Twilight Hour.
It's the Twilight, yeah.
And that's basically when, you know, it's when the sun's pretty much going down, and you have that brief moment between light
and dark.
Yes, I was about to say life and death. No, light and dark. And that's when Taki, basically, our Taki, gets to actually meet Mitsu. And they actually get to talk for a brief moment. And I was like, yo, he actually got to do it. Yeah. Because, he went on this whole freaking journey to find out where she is. Yeah. And then being like, oh snap, she's actually dead. And then he's like, this can't be true. Take me back.
It was a very long and arduous journey of him discovering all that.
And then he meets her and he's like, you know what? It took me a while to come and find you. I'm like, boy, spit them facts.
Spit them facts.
But then the one thing that I liked, it's not only visually but also audio too, is when he wants them to write each other's names down so they don't forget the next time they wake up. Yeah. And he writes something down on Mitsuha's hand, gives the pen to her, she goes to write, and then the music's swelling and everything, and then it's just silent. The pen hits the ground, nothing. And Mitsuha gone.
I would say Mitsuha is gone, and it is assumed that she died. And at first, Taki freaks out, and then he all of a sudden can't remember her. Yeah. He's like, why am I here? Who was I looking for? And I almost broke down during that scene.
Yeah.
And my favorite scene is actually shortly before that scene happens, where he goes into the shrine that earlier in the movie we see the grandmother Mitsuha and her sister all go to this very remote shrine that's above the mountains or whatever, and drop off some ritual sake that she made for the as offering for the gods. And so Taki, in the modern timeline, goes to this shrine, drinks Mitsuha's sake, and then just like goes through this whole journey of seeing her life through his eyes.
Yeah.
And the animation in this scene, this is the part where it's like all hand drawn and beautiful, and you're just thinking to yourself, how do the animators do this? That is my favorite scene.
Yeah.
For the visuals alone, but also for what he's experiencing.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was like, that was the part where the gong also started playing as well. It was, I freaking just loved every bit of that scene!
Yeah.
But we've gone a little bit over time now.
Yeah.
I apologize, y'all. It's just, this movie is hard to explain, but it's also a really, really good movie.
And
Like
we really recommend that you guys go and watch it.
Yes, definitely. But yeah.
I think that should do it for us.
Yeah. So thank you all for tuning in, and we hope that you enjoyed listening to
In
Between the Lines. Bye, y'all.
See you guys.